we are back in the room. Welcome back to our audience and to DDS and Alex. Thank you again for joining us. We have got some questions. We've got some brilliant questions, actually, and I'm really looking forward to putting those to you both in 20 minutes or so. But we did promise our audience as part of today's webinar that the key theme was going to be practical advice. And one of the areas, and Alex, you alluded to this in your example earlier, I do hear quite often the story that there is a skills shortage. We know that organisations are finding it difficult to attract talent. That's not just in the UK transport sector or within rail, it's across the whole of the UK. People have changed the way that they want to live and work as a result of what they've gone through personally in the global pandemic. So we've had the great resignation. We've had people who've decided that actually they didn't like the way they were treated by their employer during the pandemic, so they're off. And different organisations now insisting that people come back to work 5 days a week in the office. And people are voting with their feet on that one as well. Although, you know, there's a whole different webinar around remote working and hybrid, etc., and what the pros and cons. But I would really love to focus the next 20 minutes or so in terms of talent pipelining. So how do we attract people into the UK transport sector from underrepresented communities? What do organisations need to do? So I guess first and foremost, if I can come to DDS, just you give us some amazing practical examples in the book. Can you share perhaps your favourite or the first ones that come to mind? What are the really good recruitment practices that you have seen in organisations that you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, I think philosophically, it's really important to start with 3 questions, which is where are you advertising, how are you selecting, and who is interviewing? And you know, the first job of creating a diverse pipeline is making sure that the people that are so-called diverse hires are even able to be aware that there are jobs to be recruited into. And oftentimes I hear people say, well, I'm using LinkedIn, that goes to everyone. And I think you shared with me, Nina, that there was a powerful stat the other day that only 53% of the workforce are on LinkedIn. So there's 47% of the workforce already not being reached via LinkedIn. And even if you are advertising on LinkedIn, then we know that the big tech companies like LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, they all have their algorithms that will mean that only certain ads get served to certain people. So the first piece of advice would be really understanding, getting your recruitment selection team, your talent acquisition team, whatever it is that you call them, to really think about those sources. Where are you searching for talent? Where are you advertising? And are you putting the ads in front of people that you want to attract? Second of all is, how are you selecting? And so there's some really, really, you know, we can't escape, you know, that the phrase unconscious bias was very much a buzzword for a while. And I think it's really important to understand that you know, unconscious biases play out in our life in unconscious ways. That's why they're called unconscious biases. And our biases arise from the training and conditioning we receive as a young person by our family, by the media, by the church we go to, by the school that we go to. And they affect our perceptions and the way in which we look at the world at an unconscious level. The question isn't whether unconscious bias is at play. The question is, how is my unconscious bias at play? And what we need to do in recruitment processes is to remove the margin of error that can be caused by our unconscious biases. So an example would be having hiring managers review resumes or CVs or applications that remove names, because we know from research that there is bias that creeps in based off of someone's name. Does it sound like a white name? Does it sound like a male name? Or does it sound like something else? And that can be one level of influence. The same with addresses or cities. The same with schools that people went to. And there can be a real bias towards people that did or didn't go to university. And if they did go to university, which university did they go to? Because actually what really matters in recruitment is, does this person have the knowledge and the skills to be able to do the job in which they will become experienced in doing? And so removal of any other data other than skills, knowledge, and experience is a way to remove that bias that is at play. And then we go to this space of who is running the interviews. And are you running an interview panel? Is a candidate going to be put in front of the same person throughout the recruitment process? Are there different recruiters that are used? And whatever the approach is that you decide to use and to deploy, is making sure that there is diversity wired into the interview panel or the interview team. So those would just be some examples.
Perfect. Thank you. Completely agree, as you would expect me to, in the terms of where do you advertise. On occasion and quite often actually during last year, when the candidate market was moving quite a lot, and certainly 2020, when the aviation industry, for example, had made a lot of people redundant, and the rest of the transport industry was benefiting from that, because there were some really cracking candidates out there who were looking for jobs. And so therefore they were on LinkedIn, they were checking out the different train operating companies' websites, for example, or following them on LinkedIn. But actually it's not a captive audience that we've got. We have to be, many of you who will know me will know that I am an absolute evangelist for the rail industry, but there are not, believe it or not, there are not a queue of people out there all desperately beating our door down to come and work with us in the rail industry or in the transport industry. So we've got to get cleverer in terms of where we're looking, and can really think about, how do we access these different communities? And we don't just keep going and fishing in the same pond. There are lots of different ponds that we can go to. I think the how do you select? You've made such a pertinent point, DDS, around this kind of what's sometimes known as blind CVs. So taking the name off, taking the address off. The date of birth went a few years ago now, so that's that doesn't need to be on, obviously. But you can still work that out if somebody said when they went to school. Obviously, it's not difficult to work out. We've been working with the Rail Delivery Group for some years now, and they changed their process a couple of years ago into application forms which take off all of the references to the years that they've worked for different organisations. For example, it wouldn't say 1982 to 1987, it would say 5 years at that organisation. And they're having some really good results with that. Yeah. And I think, the point is really well made in relation to, let's focus on skills, knowledge and experience. There was a report that came out via City AM, I think it was last week, possibly the week before. And it was a study that had been done into blind CVs, or anonymising CVs is probably a better term for it. The recruitment of black people increased by 79% when the process was anonymised, and it was skills-based versus your old kind of send a cover letter, let's do a group task, let's ask you to do a presentation. 79%.
Staggering.
It's absolutely staggering, isn't it? So really, really relevant point. Can I come back to the unconscious bias challenge that we have? There are various different schools of thought here in relation to whether unconscious bias training is worth its salt. What's your view on that?
Well, look, I've had a 25-year career before I set up my business, 25 years in learning and development, org psych, org development roles. I did a post after I did my bachelor's degree. I did a postgraduate certificate in adult education. So I've been in training and learning my entire career, still am. I think there's a really, really big problem with calling slide presentations training, right? It is not training, particularly, it is presentation and it is information giving. So when we run necessary, the e-learning slides that, you click through and you do a little quiz at the end, really, really important. But I want to stress they are really great at information giving if the person on the other end of the mouse is paying attention, right? Because I know, because I've been there myself when I had to do, the annual training that you do every year that you refresh. Sometimes let it play in the background while I'm doing my emails or watching EastEnders or whatever it is, right? These things that are often, or the unconscious bias trainings that are often kind of pushed out into organizations, I think the word training attached to them is a very, very loose definition of the term. They are unconscious bias information giving sessions. They are unconscious bias presentations. When you take that information into a discussion about how these biases can play out in the workplace and in relationship, that's when learning starts to happen. And it's only when learning starts to happen that you can call an event a training. Yeah. Other than that, it's a presentation. So that is my very, very specific hobby horse, personal, thing that I have about those types of trainings.
Perfect. I would ask at this point, the audience, so people who are tuned in, if you have taken part in any learning that's around unconscious bias that you feel has been successful and has had a good result, can you pop it in the chat, please? Because I would love to know about it. DDS, you've given us three really great questions and you've kind of put some information around there. I'm going to come to Alex in relation to what DDS has shared with us already in relation to where do you advertise, how are you selecting and who is interviewing. Again, from a practical application point of view, what else do you want to add?
So I think they're all great. I would build on that, and I would say, what is the outcome you're trying to achieve? And for me, the outcome that I would like to achieve is I would like a workforce which is fully reflective of the communities that we serve. So TfL do this. TfL measure the diversity of London. They measure the diversity of their workforce, and then they say our workforce is 60% reflective. Yeah. So diversity is different in different places, isn't it? London's more diverse than Scotland, so you wouldn't expect the Scottish workforce to be as diverse as London, for example. But if we don't do this, we will be told to do it. The Mayor of London recently told the Met Police that they had to be 15% BAME. I think I'm right in thinking London is 15% BAME. So he wasn't asking the Met Police to be anything special. He just wanted the police force to be fully reflective with London's diversity. And so if we don't do this, we will be told to do it. Mm. And some people can't even see the issue. So, I've had people say to me, oh, here's a picture, Alex, of the new apprentices. Look at this. Isn't it fabulous? And there'll all be sort of white men. And I go, isn't there something missing from that picture? Some people literally can't see it. Yeah. They can't see it. I've lived and worked in London, so I've got a different experience than someone who's always lived and worked in Scotland. And so you do have to educate. And when I was at the Office of Rail and Road, as it's now called, we did diversity training. I personally found it really helpful because, for example, one of the things I learned is that, it's a natural instinct to not always, feel completely 100% comfortable with people who aren't like you, because it's a survival instinct. Human beings are tribal, and actually it does require conscious effort to overcome all those biases which are a function of the way you're wired and the way you've been brought up, which of course is so incredibly different from the way everyone else has been brought up. And it was interesting what you said, Nina, there about, you get home and you think, crikey, I've spent all day looking after everyone else, but what about me? This is a gross generalisation, but females at work are more selfless than men, right? That is a generalisation.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I've realised since the 23rd of March 2020, when we all started working at home and on Teams and stuff, and we all put the yellow hand up, don't we? Because we want to come in at some point. But sometimes we just put the yellow hand up to log the fact we want to come in. We don't necessarily want to come in now. Women will often say, oh, Alex, would you like to come in there? And it's, no, it's fine. I'm happy to wait. Men never give way to women. So here's an example of a new environment, which was all completely new to us on the 23rd of March, but our unconscious wiring is leading to this sort of gendered behaviour, which I find absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
So I'm fed up with incrementalism. I want big, hairy, audacious goals. I want to be fully reflective of society. I do want 50% of the workforce to be female by 2035 or whenever we achieve it. How do we know how we're going to get there? No, not sure. Have we thought of all the practical implications? No, not really. But actually, often HR departments are quite resistant in this area. They don't want to set targets. Obviously, we positive action is allowed, positive discrimination less so. But for example, I've said, right, why don't we make sure every interview panel is gender balanced? And someone said to me, the problem with that, Alex, is the women would spend all their time interviewing. They wouldn't do any work. And you're thinking, that is the point. Unless you do something different and totemic, you're always going to carry on recruiting people who are overrepresented in your workforce. Yeah. So when I go to a headhunter, I say, right, I want a gender balanced shortlist. And you can see the look on their face. They think, oh, shit, that means we're going to have to work really hard on this commission. Because actually, what I wanted to give you was the folder of 20 white male guys in their 50s. But actually, no, I'm going to have to earn my fee. And, with the COO ScotRail recruitment, we had a gender balanced shortlist. We gave the job to the best candidate, a female leader from outside the rail industry, and she's bringing fresh thinking into our industry, which is brilliant. So if you are not gender balanced recruiting, why aren't you gender balanced recruiting? Because if you're not, you are missing out on all this talent. You are missing out on the ability to be a better place to work. You are missing out on the ability to deliver a better service to your customers.
Absolutely, and I need to. So I'll come from a personal perspective first. We don't say "oh shit" when you ask for a diverse shortlist. We say "yes, fantastic, we'd love to work with you." One of the things that clients often say is, "well, when we're talking about you need to have a diverse panel." But we haven't got anybody. We haven't got anybody from the Black or Asian ethnic minority group on the senior team. We don't have any women on the senior team. We don't have anyone from the LGBTQ community on the senior team. And my response always to that is, why do they need to be on the senior team?
Brilliant.
If you've got people within your organisation who represent different areas of diversity, bring them onto your interview panel. They don't have to be an executive director of the organisation. And actually, there's a really strong argument to say that you should be doing this anyway. Get your frontline people there interviewing the future leaders of the organisation.
And Nina, I would add to that as well, and I see this starting to happen so often. People who have what Alex described earlier as invisible, diverse identities, but even those that have visible, diverse identities. So anyone who is Black or Asian or Middle Eastern, from an ethnic group, anyone that is from the LGBTQ plus community, anyone that is neurodiverse, and anyone that is a woman. So oftentimes, if they're not on the leadership team, then they get brought in, they get wheeled in to be the voice of the entire community, having had a lived experience most of their life, or if not all of their life, of being marginalized or oppressed or excluded. And now all of a sudden they're being asked to give even more emotional labor. And so if we are, organizations out there, if we are relying on these people who aren't in leadership positions, who are on the front line to do additional work, then bloody well pay them. It is as simple as that. Yeah. Give them stipends, give them bonuses, raise their hourly rate. If we're asking them to do additional emotional labor, let's pay them for what they're doing.
Absolutely. And you make the point in the book about this as well, in terms of employee networks, that it's these employee networks are working really, really well. So the Archway employee network that they mentioned earlier, there are 6 different employee networks, I think, at Network Rail. I know other organisations within the transport industry have got them. But you do have to be aware that people can't do such an important role on top of their already important role without that being recognised. Yep. And there needs to be a budget, and there needs to be an allowance of time, and there needs to be executive sponsorship, doesn't there? So there's some kind of the best practice stuff around this. I caught sight of a comment from Dawn Badminton Caps in the chat just then, when in relation to what I've just suggested in bringing people on to interview panels, and Dawn saying, well, surely that there should be people on the executive team. And yes, absolutely, Dawn, there should be, absolutely, completely, but there isn't. So we are where we are, and we've got to start making things look different. And it's all very well and good recruiting for diversity. HR and talent acquisition teams are working harder than they've ever done to recruit a diverse workforce. But if we're bringing people into an organisation where there is no diversity, then not only are we fishing in the talent pool for diverse workforce, but we're also looking within that for pioneers, for people who are prepared to be the first person of colour, the first gay man, the first gay woman, whatever it is in that organisation. And that's a different kettle of fish altogether when we're asking people to be the first and not to come and join an organisation which already welcomes diversity. So my goodness, so much to go at here. I just want to throw one more thing into the pot, if I may, before we move on to questions, which is a kind of a bit of a personal soapbox topic for me. Pay what the role is worth. We are frequently asked, as when we're presenting candidates, what salary are they on now? What difference does it make? What is the role worth? What do you want to pay the right candidate to perform this role to the standard that you want them to perform it to? Because if we start looking at what they're earning now, your gender pay gap is never going to close. Believe me, it just won't. And we see this so often. And people say to me, why won't clients tell you? Why won't they advertise and put a salary on it, put a salary on the advert? That's why, because too many organisations are still asking, what's the candidate earning now?